So today we're going to be taking my S13 and we're going to be putting a budget angle kit on it to see it back on the floor.
So if you're wondering exactly how much angle does a budget angle kit get you, I would say this is a fair bit amount of angle. Now this entire setup that we have will cost you just a little over $300, and well, I could say the results speak pretty well for themselves. And this kit utilizes all factory components. So now that we see what it looks like, let's see the process that it took for us to actually get there.
So here I have the GKTECH RCC, which is the roll center correction. And the beauty of this is, not only do you get an angle kit with it, but you also do it utilizing all your stock components. So here we have our stock S13 knuckle. We're using stock inner and outer tie rods and keeping the setup as simple as possible. As a part of the process, we're trying to make this car as fresh and tight as possible. So with that being said, we purchased a new rack. We have new lower control arms. All we did was simply grind off the bump stops that are here. We simply just repainted the knuckles just to make them look a little nicer. And we bought all new components as far as the tie rods, and we have obviously our angle kit. The angle kit portion itself is actually really simple. One side bolts up to the lower control arm, the other side bolts up to the knuckle, and the tie rod bolts up to this. Now, in conjunction of this, we're also going to be putting a rack offset spacer, so that way we don't have any steering binding issues with it. The first step of this entire process is, let's put our cross member in the car, and then we can attach everything else to that. Up to this point, it's going to be just as if we're installing stock suspension back on the car. We're first going to take our lower control arm, we're going to put it into our cross member, and we're going to torque it down. Now, something very important to note here is, we can all agree that grip is very important in drifting, especially front grip, as that's going to dictate where you're going to be going. So if we take this bolt and we overly torque it down, where this can't actually rotate, then we're essentially killing our front grip. It's really important that we're going to follow all of the manufacturer torque specs, which I'll leave down into the description down below. That way this can be able to actually freely move, which will allow us to get a lot more grip when we're driving. Now we're going to dress up, we're going to prepare our RCC adapters. Now here we have two threaded holes, one's larger than the other, and we're going to have two hardware that are going to correspond. All we're going to do is we're going to thread our hardware down. So now if we notice, we're going to have two holes here. Now these two holes are two different options for our tie rods to bolt up to, and this just depends on what application your car is. If you plan on grip racing, this hole on our right side is going to be for our grip position. We're going to have 40 millimeters roll center correction, and we're also going to have 40 millimeter bump steer correction. Now if you're into drifting, you're going to be using this hole on the left. Now this hole on the left is going to give you faster steering, lower ackerman, and it's going to give you a maximum lock. So you're going to increase the angle your car is actually going to turn. Now to make it easier for you guys to see, I'm actually going to install this off the car. So now, if we notice here, we're going to have one tapered side, and this is going to be our ball joint side. And then we have a thread adapter, which also has a slight taper. And this is going to be for our tie rod end. So now comes time for installation. We're going to be taking our threads, and we're going to be setting them down most of the way. And we'll do our final adjustments now when we install them. I find it easiest if we install our bolt first into the knuckle. We're going to take our tapered end, and we're just simply going to thread it in. Now we'll take our nut for the ball joint side and we'll place it. So now as we install it, we're going to have this little gap here. So what we're going to do is we're going to be adjusting our shims through the bottom. We're going to take a Allen key, up until we get it just to sit flush, just like that. Then we'll do the same now for our other side. And so our end result, we should end out with the gap. It's nice and tight on both ends. At this point now, we can tighten down our tops. Now with everything all bolted up, we have our lower control arm that's going to be bolted up to this hole. Now we are going to be using the inner hole as it is further for our tie rod for our drift position. This would be for our grip position. We have our tie rod on our knuckle bolted up here, and then our knuckle lower control arm is now bolted up here. So now everything fits, and this essentially is going to extend our lower control arm without physically having to actually extend our lower control arm, which works really great because in case of a situation where we bend our lower control arm and we need a quick replacement, we can hopefully find one either at the auto parts store or find somebody who has a stock lower control arm and swap it over. Now for the next part, we're going to be removing our inner tie rod from our steering rack so we can install our offset rack spacer. no no different.
Many unbearable hours later.
For our offset rack spacers, we're first going to remove the inner tie rod. And if anybody's ever ordered a rack from Rock Auto, you already understand that this is way harder than it needs to be. But after you struggle enough and finally get this out, then we're going to install our offset rack spacer. From here, you want our rack spacer to be facing forward. So, easy way to know is our power steering lines are actually facing the rear of the car. So you want our offset rack spacers to be facing the opposite way of that. And from there, we're going to bolt our tie rod to here as we normally would. And this is exactly how it's going to look. Now we'll slide our boot on over it, and we'll move on to our next step. Grip racing, drifting. So now to help with our high angle that we're now going to be getting, we have a high angle clearance tension bar. So all we're going to do is simply just make sure that our angle follows which way our wheel will be. And if you notice here, we also have one side where the spacer is going to be larger than the other side. This is to, again, help center everything as far from to one side as possible so we can have the most amount of clearance here. What we're going to do is we're going to put aside our tension rod bracket, and then we're going to put it here. Our torque specs for here and here. Now we're good to go. So now as you guys can see, this is our final result for our angle. So this would be our leading tire, and this would be our following tire. So now for a total of just over $300, and honestly not that much time and work into it, using all your stock components, can't complain with this type of angle you're going to get out of it. Now, as far as how it drives, in the future I'll be doing a direct comparison with not only my other drift car, but a friend's car. All three are set up differently. All three are set up in very specific ways for their reasonings. And I would love to see how this compares to those cars that have a lot more money and a lot more design work and things behind it versus this, as this is a very cheap, budget, easy to do kit. As far as my final thoughts, I found this kit to be really easy to install, very direct. Honestly, there's no complications to it. The only kind of special things that you're going to need is you are going to need a 12 as well as a 14 Allen key, which is on the bigger side. So if you don't have those, I guess that's the only specialty tool that you really need during this whole process. Everything else from there, basic sockets, a little bit of thread locker, and just a little bit of time. So that's going to be it for today. Our car is now done. We have front suspension on it. We can now put the car back on the floor and at least roll it around. We definitely still need to order the brake stuff, as well as I forgot to order the bushings for the rack itself. But other than that, for the most part, it's done. It can now roll again. Now we can start getting to putting the swap in it and hopefully getting this car running and driving sometime soon. So like always, I'll catch you guys in the next ones. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know down below.